I figured that it's just something when you're having normal conversations with guys and you start talking about faith or Christianity or church or frustration is always some kind of frustration seems to be at the forefront of the conversation all the time. Super easy to go down that route. I asked Laura during the week, "Hey, what's a frustration? What's a frustration you feel?" And she goes, "On what aspect?" And I said, "Well, let's start with say church. What's your frustration with church?" And she said, "There's too much focus on." I'll get it right because I hate to do it. Discredit to her. There's too much focus on gifts of the Spirit, and not enough focus on fruits of the Spirit. And then just walked away.
Dropped the mic.
I was like, strong. So I thought I'd raise the question with you guys. You've been around church for a lot longer than I have. How do you feel that lines up with what you've experienced?
100%. Yeah, I agree with that statement. I think, I think how can I say this? It's a unintentional result of how church is done these days. Using the use of social media, the use of all the media platforms, which are good. I think we spoke about that last time. They're good, but they're a method. They're not the end product, so to speak. But I just think that creates like a hero culture, so to speak. So it's if you've got a gift in your life that translates well within, say, Instagram or online, which is obviously going to be bented towards an entertaining speaker.
Character.
Whereas if the gifts of the Spirit might be, you might be just gifts of service. So that doesn't really translate over well to a podcast, a video, a quick a minute video on Instagram. So those things sort of get pushed to the side, and there's like a hierarchy of value to it. Yeah, I totally agree with that statement.
Gifts over fruit. Yeah, 100%. I think it comes naturally. There is a thing by default with gifts to promote that because it's easier to see. And a gift can contribute. We are talking about the context of church, right?
Absolutely.
We are, yeah. So in the context of a church, a ministry, the gift is obviously, because it's easier to see, it's easy to promote because then it can accomplish something within that church, any church, that even as a pastor, if I see a gift, there is a propensity or a bent to go and, approach that person who has the gift because it has the potential to accomplish a goal. So I agree. And fruit maybe takes a bit longer to develop. But yeah,
That's true though. That's true. So when you have young people into a thriving Pentecostal church where it's built on gifts and young leaders, quite often the character's not there yet.
Yeah. No.
Because the gifting comes. I mean, it could be a singer from Triple J, and all of a sudden you're leading worship because it's on your life. So
we were always told, your character it's paramount because your character holds you for your gift. What your gift can't hold you in. Now that is true, but I think there is a bent towards, although that being true, let's work on the character. There is definitely that element though, where I think as pastors and people in church, leading church, can push that aside because, well, man, you got the gift. Let's go. We got a job to do, and that can be dangerous.
You reckon that's why we probably see quite often a lot of the charismatic ones fall, or take a public fall, or something, or some kind of scandal?
100%. Even if you just take it out of the church context and just think of a gifted athlete, how many times do you see them have a moral failure because it's just all been about their physical
raw
gift,
talent,
talent that gets them so far, and the gifts out here and the characters back here, and it slowly gets an imbalance, and then
it's like a Jared Hayne versus a Cameron Smith.
100%. Yep. just when you were talking before about, we're talking in the church context, it's you can't get away from the fact that the current way we do church highlights some gifts more than others.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about that?
Dan?
The gift, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So is that legit? Is that fine?
As in the certain gifts are more highlighted. Yeah, 100%. Like if I can sing like an angel, and my character may be a little bit lagging, I think, man, if I can sing
We
like
see
an
that all the
angel-
time. That's probably a prominent one.
Well, with my singing.
No.
Oh, sorry. I thought you meant like with my
Not
incredible
quite.
voice.
We never see that. No.
Okay, no.
But
I'm
that
just
is
double-checking.
one you see all the time at the moment. Obviously, the worship has become a genre or has become its own movement, but not for the best reasons, because there's a lot of influence attached to it. But it's more about the person, which is why I've always felt a bit funny about having someone come to a church to lead worship because they've just released a certain worship song.
Yep.
I found it funny because it makes it about the person, because they've just done this. I get people carry a certain anointing and stuff like that, but I don't think we're seeing so much of someone with this amazing anointing coming in, more as we're seeing someone who's just had success with a song. So they're coming in. So I agree, it's a prominent one is in worship. You obviously see it with great preachers. But when you look at someone with great character, someone like Billy Graham, and you stand him up against some of the really influential communicators these days, they're chalk and cheese in the way they deliver themselves. They really are.
Worlds apart.
Yeah. And it's funny that everyone talks about Billy Graham, but none of the preachers these days are aiming to try and be like him at all in the way they dress or.
It's interesting. I'm pretty sure one of his quotes when he was towards the end of his time was he wished he would have focused more on a smaller group of men to disciple,
Wow.
rather than the big stadiums.
He said something. Didn't he say something like, if they asked him what would you do differently, I think he said I would speak less and maybe disciple more or learn more. Probably worth looking that quote up, because I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So the whole, going back to it's frustrating.
Well, I guess that's a frustration for us. We see stuff like this in say church context. That's a frustration right there.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
I think it is. I think it's a frustration at a lot of different levels. It's frustrating for the person that's been maybe committed, faithful, but the gift is not really that prominent in church. They kind of can be just oversighted. That's a frustration. It actually can turn into a frustration for the person that has the gift as well, because I think for them it becomes they're more about what you do than who you are. So, I've actually seen this happen in church. Pastors will. Now, I am a pastor, so I'm better throw that in there, so I'm not just throwing bullets, throwing rocks. But I think pastors they can just see a gift, not a person. But in actual fact, we are human beings before human doings, and that's a frustration with someone I think is gifted. Deep down, I think it's a frustration, but they'll work with it because of the prominence it may give them. So they'll kind of just roll with it, but eventually something kicks in where they can realise, hang on a minute, I feel like I'm just a means to an end. That's a frustration. And then obviously people that are observing all of this can be there going, man, I know Johnny. Johnny's a mongrel.
Yeah.
And here's Johnny up there doing his thing, looking like, John Bon Jovi on steroids. And that's a frustration for someone. And I think, frustration is at so many different levels in life, in church. It touches so many areas of life.
I think at the core of it, if we're on this kind of topic, which I reckon this will resonate with people, because not going down a bitter route, but everyone has their own opinion of how church should be. Not everyone's right, not everyone's wrong. Everyone has their own idea. But I really do think these kind of areas, as the Western Pentecostal church, we're not doing that well across the board, because you will get pastor after pastor in a big growing church that will get up and say, it's not about the gift, but you can look and it's about the gift.
Because
all
the actions tell you
The
it is about
that's
the
right.
gift.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and it's the elevation of gifts are a cultural thing. I don't think they're biblical.
Mm.
So you spoke about the human side of it. If we talk about the ascension gifts or the fivefold ministry or however you want to talk about it, if Jesus came to show us how to truly be human, and if we go right back to the garden where we were created in the image of God, and right up until Jesus, we just couldn't live up to the standard of being what God intended us and created us to be. And Jesus came and showed us, hey, I'm going to show you how to truly be human here. And I think a lot of the gifts get squeezed into like a Sunday church context, when above that it's about us being truly human and about us operating in those gifts throughout the week, not just on a Sunday. So, our pastoral gift, most of the work happens through the week, right?
100%. Yep.
And so if you're, and I think, and I'm not a pastor, so people can take this with a grain of salt, but a lot of the people that we call pastors are just great speakers.
Yeah.
And is that what a pastor is? A pastor is a shepherd, someone who can, see gifts and call gifts out of people. If you've got a great speaking gift in your life, does that mean you're a pastor? I don't necessarily think so. But that's where people get pushed down in that route, and then you've obviously got the worship and other things. But like, if you're in a large church context, does the prophetic gift get to operate as much as it usually does? Evangelism, that gets pushed in a box. So if we take it right back to the early church, I would have seen these gifts more operating in a more of a natural sense of just humans interacting towards one another, rather than a platform or something that you're aspiring to.
Yeah. We were talking about this the other day in Matthew 25. Jesus is telling a parable about a guy who gives, one guy gives 1 talent, another guy gives 2 talents, to another he gives 5. And the Bible's really clear. He says he gives it according to their ability. And as pastors, I'm talking from the pastoral leadership element now, when it comes to, I think there's potential for pastors to maybe prevent a lot of frustration that is caused in the people. So the Bible says, to one he gives 1, to the other 2, then 5, according to their ability, meaning that, the guy who had 1 couldn't handle 5, the guy who had 2 couldn't handle 5, the guy who had 5 could handle 2. So as a pastor, if I don't identify that, if I don't see that in the people, I can burn someone out who has the talent of 2, but I'm like, here, take 5, because I've got a vision, I've got a dream, this is where we're going, come on, let's get on, let's move. So I can say to the guy who has the ability for 2, here's 5. This creates a burnout, because this guy's like, man, I'm running, I'm going, let's go, I've got to go. Maybe because I feel like I've got to please the guy. But then on the other side of that is you got the guy who has 5. If I'm, as a pastor and as a leader, if I'm insecure, if I don't have humility, I can stifle that guy who has 5 because I'm threatened by his gift. So I'll hold back and say he's 2. And he's frustrated to the hilt because there's this grace on his life, or this call for more, because of my own insecurity and my own maybe lack of humility. I will chop that and, mate, you're good with 2. And this guy's frustrated. And I think there's that sort of frustration happens within the 4 walls of church, and people are burnt out, people get frustrated, and it's an interesting dynamic to dialogue on, because I think it happens a lot. I have seen it.
Of course it does.
A few times.
Yeah. I keep going back to this sort of saying. Laura and I have dialogued. We've talked about this stuff over the last 2 years heavily. One, because we went through that journey of leaving an environment, going somewhere else, and that's always hard. But then just stepping back and and we kept coming back to this idea, hey, if Jesus walked into this church, like wherever we were or where we went or when we tried out, whatever, if Jesus walked into this church, what would he say? Super hard question, because every time I've asked that of other people who don't go to the church where I go, if I've asked them, what do you think Jesus would say if he walked into your church? You can tell on their face straight away that they have some issues with the way things are run, mainly from the core stuff, like we're not getting the main thing. If someone sitting in the congregation can see that so clearly, why is it across the planet there's so many that, like, we can obviously sit back and make calls on churches. It's easy to do in your armchair, very easy to do. But I still think they're right. You know what I mean? I think we're calling out stuff that's there clearly. Lots of people say it, yet heaps of leaders keep going down the same path. And before they get to that real pivotal point where it's like, it's all going to fall apart, they knew 3 years earlier, don't want to go that way. They still end up that way, and they follow the same thing that happens. How do you stop it? Because we can talk about it.
Yeah.
It would be foolish of us to think that the people who have these massive platforms don't recognize this on some level. Like they're weapons of people, unbelievable operations of people. They can build teams. They're not stupid. At some point, someone's just turning a blind eye, or they're just making a decision in their heart going, it's almost, they're just making a decision to say, I'm going this way because this is what I want to do. How do you fix that? I know it feels heavy, but it's like, it's probably been happening for a long time before I started going to church. I recognized it early, and I feel so content sitting on that and knowing that. And it's not I can just see it and go, and that's where I love where I go now, because I can see how much intentionality goes into. It's actually easier to grow and go that way than it is to be intentional about being discipleship focused. It's easier to grow because naturally, if you've got a good thing, people want to come to it. And then you always talk about it. It gets to a certain number, and it's hard to maintain those close, intimate relationships and build community, which is really, the Acts 2 Church is really about discipleship, people coming in, sending out, training. That's kind of not what we see in the really big, successful churches. So you've been around for a long time. How many times have you seen it go that way? When I say a long time,
Not that long.
You've been long enough to see very, very similar patterns all the time.
Yeah, I talk from being a pastor.
Yep.
So maybe I guess I want to be more harsh on that element because it's.
I asked you because I know that you're super intentional about this.
It's the seat that I sit in. So I think at a base level, pastors, I think, and leaders could eliminate a lot of frustration in people if I could just work out who I am, my identity as a pastor, that it's not, sorry, let me rephrase that my identity is not because I am a pastor. I find this is stuff I did have to wrestle out in my own walk with the Lord and realize that, I often would shut people down that maybe had an opinion. I just say yes. I just need yes people. That's what you need. We've got a job to do, but things to sort out. Just yes is the answer I need. And if somebody had a little bit of a differing opinion, I could easily shut that down. And that basically come out of my own insecurity. If I really was honest, it came out of my own insecurity, my lack of identity in who Christ was in my life. And so I think in my earlier days, I definitely created a lot of frustration in people because I would not, just simply listen. And I think one of the ways to help take that out of people in the church is if I have my identity and I am secure, there should be a freedom for people to express what they're thinking and feeling. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not interested in some guy who's just walked in and wants to fire bullets at me. I'm not, mate. I don't know you. Boot off. Yeah. So you know what I'm saying. There's definitely that element, no doubt. But when there's been people who are faithfully serving, loving the Lord, just walking with their families, and man, they're a part of what's happening. If they got something to say, man, I should be big enough to go. Man, feel free to articulate that. But this is not an environment you're going to be shut down. As an example, a few years ago, there's a lady in our church, still in our church, great family. Apparently, I can't remember this. I gave her a word, her actual family a word from the preaching during my message, and she wrote me a message during the week and said, "Hey, I kind of missed it. Could you just tell me what the rest of it was? I got half of it." So I wrote back, literally in the message, wrote, "My bad." And then I started to explain what I said. And then she wrote back to me and said, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to, you know.
She took the "my bad" as like
exactly,
like you're angry.
My bad, like my bad. Whoa, sorry,
Context,
my bad. And it is black and white on the screen.
Of course.
And so she came back with, "Man, I'm sorry, I wasn't having a go. I just felt like you being a male, a role model, a pastor, I thought I'd take the risk to say something," because the context of that, her life, as they came out of a very dictatorial leadership where they were just constantly shut down. And then when I realised where she was coming from, I wrote straight back and said, "Man, please, that's not what I meant by my bad. What I meant was, man, genuinely, my bad. I should have articulated it more clearly." And I said, "You have every right to ask whatever question you want to ask," is what I wrote back. And then she just wrote this long message and just was a gratitude.
Yeah.
But I think that I've got to be secure. And I think some guys, to be honest, some pastors, they wrestle with that. They don't want to hear that. No.
Do you obviously do you think that you've been on both sides where you've been super driven yourself, right? Did you recognise at some point that you didn't want to? And again, this is not a problem with, say, a mega church. It's nothing to do with that at all. Because there's some great ones around with lots of people. It's got nothing to do with size.
I agree.
Do you? You must have at some point decided that for your personality, going that route wasn't going to work out. Because there's some who can do it very well. It's a personality thing.
I worked it out by just literally looking at who Jesus is. And I couldn't see Jesus in how sometimes I would treat people. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's great.
And I realised, man, that's actually everyone he treated was with dignity, with respect, with honour, with grace, with love. And for me, it was something where I'm like, man, if I follow you, I profess to follow you, Jesus. So that was my main indications were like, that's not Christ-like to just shut someone down. You know, I don't want to hear what you've got to say because it's not what I want to hear. So that for me was a real fundamental. It should always come back to that. Like, man, how does Christ treat people? And I think, you know, again, I don't want to sound like I'm attacking the church because I love the church, man. I've been a part of this thing full time for 22 years, pouring our life into it, always will. But I definitely can see these elements in church that's really unhealthy.
It's only a discussion on how we can do better.
Yeah.
And the reason I want to talk about it is because I know that we're not the only people who think it.
It's true.
I mean, you see the people the people closest to the senior leadership have these conversations at home with their wives instead of having it in an open. I think if you have it in a positive light.
Yeah, agreed.
I just think I love the answer that. I think for someone like myself too, who I wouldn't know the word as well as so many of these leaders that I would just disagree with the way they do things. But I feel like everything I do, I try and approach it with, how would Jesus do this? How would Jesus act? And when you run that, if you've only got to read the Gospels as a starting point to know the answer to every situation.
It's true. How do you see it, Scott? From your
Yeah, I mean, when you
experience
guys are talking there, plenty of thoughts. There's a guy called Josh Packard who did a whole bunch of research around a large number of people, and he calls them the duns. They're a category of the duns, and you got the duns and then the nuns. So the nuns are essentially people that put on the census whenever it comes out. This is American stats, but no religious affiliation, maybe spiritual, but no religious affiliation. And the duns were, he went all around America and because he saw this trend. They saw this trend of basically the stats that they had of people leaving church. And he's like, his initial thoughts were, these are going to be people that are either bitter, they haven't been able to get into leadership, or they're church hopping. And what he found was with the duns was that it was actually a lot of people who loved Jesus but was sick of the way church was being done. So they were leaving because they felt like spiritually they couldn't grow staying in these environments where like you say, it's all about you got to do and follow my vision, and it's a hierarchy, and it's my vision, the highway, etc. And I just thought it was very, very interesting stat that's coming out, and it's very sad in a way, because I'm the same. The church is the answer to the world, and it's what Jesus gave us to basically, again, coming back to live as humans. But I think it's not about finding the right model. There's no right model, and I think the New Testament shows that in a way, way where there's no like, hey, this is how you do church. Here's all like the 10, 12 steps, and you see Paul talking to different places, and he's talking about different things that are going on in that place that aren't going on here. So I think there's amazing room there, and it's about finding, like you say, it's Jesus is our pattern for life.
Yeah,
following him, and I think there's some, like you say, there's some real clues in there where I see Jesus often getting away from the large crowds because he knew that if he started to feed into that, and the power gets us. We're frail as humans. I think there's some real clues there, and where we see Jesus. It's almost like you read some of the Gospels, and it's just a little bit of a side note. He dropped off by himself and had some time on his own, or got out of town because crowds started to swell. And the way I interpret that is him not getting drunk on the power of, hey, I've got things to say here. I could build a ministry out of this. That's not to say size. We're not talking about size here, but it's about the power of, as humans we're frail, and it gets. How many moral failures have we seen from leaders? And you're talking about that over the last, and if we were in the same position, maybe we would fail too, because the power blinds you. You think you're invincible. You think it's all about influence, and I don't think it is at all. I don't see anything in the New Testament where the gospel is used by power. We see many times in history where that's been tried. We're going to force our religion on you. We're going to force our way of living on you. It's not about size and influence. It's about the Holy Spirit doing the work. And coming back to what you were saying, where you've realised that I can get in people's faces. If I have a gift of getting people to follow me, or I can get in, be one of those people who can say, I need you to do this. I can see a gift in you. What's really hard is to say, I'm going to trust the Holy Spirit in you. I see a gift in you. Maybe I can guide that in certain areas, but trusting the Holy Spirit to do what Jesus actually said he would do is actually hard, because we're not in control.
Absolutely.
Hands off. I'll be an instrument for Christ, and that's what I see a lot, is a lot of methods, marketing techniques that work, that get results, but they're not an indication of spiritual depth. And we talk about discipleship. So over the last 5-6 years of running connect groups, or being around for men, the number one frustration I saw in men was, what's my calling? What do I do in the kingdom?
Yeah.
And for the select few that might be able to get up on the stage, they're okay. What happens to the rest? Because, again, coming back to that point of, we say it's not all about the platform and these certain gifts, but our actions and our rhythms and our rituals tell us that it is.
Absolutely.
So so many guys would just be so frustrated. They'd have these amazing gifts, might just be gifts with their hands, really good mechanic, have a grace to just get around and help people, just a good listener. So many great things that don't have value in certain systems, which I think is wrong.
Yeah,
just
because
flat out wrong.
Because it's come out now. It's almost the way that we see things done, is that there's no success attached to being the guy behind closed doors who's a good mechanic who helps people.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yep.
It's funny. I look at when I was asking you guys before, like, how do you stop it? Like, what? We're not the only ones who think it. So why are people who know this stuff just keep going down this path? You know how I view it? I view it before I gave my life to Jesus, and my friend who was fully chasing after Jesus would try and get me to come to church and stuff. In my mind, I'd hear the grace message. I used to tell myself, I'm just going to live this life until I'm 80 and then welcome the Lord in at like 80. And then I've done what I want to do. I reckon that mentality sneaks into leaders. I'm going to do it this way and get it to a point, and then we're good to go. I reckon that's what happens with a lot of them. They don't start off like that. They get into this groove. They see what works with marketing and whatever it is. They just do it themselves, right? And they feel like this is growing, so God's hands on it. It might be the case, not always the case. Things grow without God. We know that. Then they get to the point where they're so deep in it, and they must be just telling themselves, sooner or later, the Holy Spirit needs to just do this. But just when I get there, just when I get to this point, it's like if I could just get here, then we all have those mentality about lots of things, about finances. If I just make this income, I'll start tithing. If I just get here, I'll buy that house. So it's the same mentality, which is our own strength, which is how guys are wired. If I just do this, God, I'm all yours. It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I think if you start getting some success and getting results, then it's very easy to think it's you. Or it's very easy to do that same thing again and again and again, and there's just the life gets sucked out of it, but we're getting results. So get on the conveyor belt and just keep churning out just good Christians.
Go. I've got a good message about that, but it's probably too long for this.
I've got another frustration for you, right? And I think about this a lot because I like to ask questions that challenge us as Christians. And we touched on this the other day. You shared a story. I won't share it now. It's up to you if you want to share it. The frustration, this is outside of church context. This is Christians living their life of faith. You have a Christian, I know, we have a Christian family. They pray every day. They love Jesus. They help people. They go to church. They serve. But they're 30, 40 years in, they're not happy. They're broke. And they're promised eternity in heaven. That's secured. But right now, they're not living life abundantly by any means. Whether people say, oh, but like lay down your life, I fully understand that. But there's no joy in them because they're broke, stuck, still doing the same thing, but loving the Lord, worshipping Him, praying. I don't know if it's a heart position by them. I'm not sure. But it's a thing I see, and it must be, it's frustrating to observe as well. Even when I've been in that position, it's also frustrating to observe when people are 20, 30 years my senior and are still there.
Yep.
And you feel like, come on, God, like show up in their life in some form.
Yep.
Like do something. Is it a blessing? Do you know what I mean? In the story I was talking about in that situation?
Yeah, I think the frustration is like, I guess, it's disappointment. Disappointment is where you have an appointment with someone that is disconnected. That will create frustration in me or you or the next person. So people, I think, can be very frustrated if they have appointments, goals, from marriage to children to business, ministry, whatever it may be, and those goals aren't reached in the time frame that they may set them in because it's disconnected now from that appointment, the goal, that this frustration comes in. And 100%, a few years ago, I was talking to one of the guys from our local community, and he was super frustrated. And, he's halfway through his life if he was to live to 100. But they were in a room and a bunch of them singing worship songs and praise, and they do this regularly and weekly and just honouring God. And one night he was in one of those usual weekly worship settings in the room, in the lounge room of someone's house, and he just looked around and was just so ticked off and frustrated and was like, man, he literally looked around the room and was just like, broke. What are we doing? That was his mentality, and he was just dialoguing with me, a few days after that night. And I think that sort of frustration is very real because I'm not saying I don't know all the dynamics, but I do understand stewardship, discipline. I think when it comes to fulfilling what God has put on your life, 100% it is fundamentally a faith call. God calls you by name, and it is a walk of faith. It's not a walk of sight. Bible's very clear on that. So there's a whole lot of unknowns. But when I'm going after and pursuing God, because I think we've talked about this, where I've often looked at people I know in church life and ministry that was their call, like it's my call, and they did certain things, and it all went to custard. And Claire and I, my wife and I, have been walking this ministry thing 22 years, and it's certainly been massively challenging, like crazy. The pressure, the dynamics, the tensions have been crazy, but we've never gone backwards. God has honoured us every step of the way. They say he's always on time, which is true, but to me he's always late. But he's always on time. And then I see other people doing what they feel God has called them to do, but then it's gone south. And I've often literally said to Claire, what happened with that? And I'm not sure I know the answer.
No, I don't.
I know there's elements, say, if you talk about money, if we're talking about money, I know there's elements with that yes, some people make a whole lot of bad decisions, get themselves into debt. No amount of prayer, no anointing oil is going to get you out of that debt. There's no miracle money going to fall out of the sky. Don't sow that damn seed. Did I just say damn? I did. Don't sow the damn seed for the $1,000 seed for that whatever. It's foolish. Because what you need to do is you made a lot of dumb decisions to get there. Now make a whole lot of good ones to get out of there. God will honour that.
Practical.
Practical. I understand that there's this...
I also, to add too, the idea of broke. I don't think broke is the factor.
Yeah.
I think it's the position of like no momentum.
Yes.
Broke stands for a lot of things.
Yes, 100%.
Finance is just where we see it in our flesh life.
Very good.
Finance is not momentum.
No.
There's a couple of things there, isn't there? Is it okay? So he's looked around the room and said broke, etc. So what measurement is he using? Is it a spiritual one where, like, my character's grown over the last 20 years? Materially, I'm not going anywhere. Like when you say, what was the word you just used?
Momentum.
Yeah, there's no momentum there. Spiritually, like
spiritual momentum.
Christian
I mean,
walk.
if you're a Christian and you're frustrated, I would say at the moment you're frustrated, you're probably not spiritually on fire in that moment, because you're only frustrated when you're looking at physical gain and finance and position. Got nothing to do with spirituality.
I always go back to, I love when Paul says, I think it's in Philippians, he says, I've learned to be happy with a lot and be happy with a little.
And he lived it.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah, literally lived it. And I think obviously we straight go to money, but that could be many different things. That could be relationships.
Absolutely.
Times of like just totally walking through the desert with maybe one or two Christians that you can talk to, and then going to, times where you got lots of relationships. That I think frustrations can bleed into many different areas, but I do see that too, where you look at older Christians and they are stuck and you think, I don't want to be that.
Yeah. I definitely want to live exactly what he said, Paul. He said, I've learnt to be content with little, with lot, with everything, with nothing. And I think for me, it's one of my goals is to be content. I still, my wife and I still are believing for, things, and not things as in like a nice Ferrari, although that'd be good.
You've already got the Lambo.
Well, I've got the Lambo, so I'll just settle for that. So I need to be content with the Lambo. So, but, like we've always wanted to build an orphanage, we still haven't done that yet. So I still want to believe for that and, drive for that. But I want to, I'm learning more and more, and we are learning to be more content, because contentment with godliness is of great gain. And I think it's true, because that contentment creates or eliminates frustration. If we think about it, that's what it is. I'm okay. I'm content in my marriage, content with my kids, content with where ministry and whether it's a business, whatever arena of life that people find themselves in, there's a contentment there. Not a lethargy. That's a whole different arena. But there's this godly contentment with what is actually happening now. But yet I'm still pushing and believing for X, Y, Z.
We got coming into Paul at the end before he died. There was no one left. So during that time, if I was in a room with Paul, you'd be looking at his ministry saying it's not very successful. Everyone's left you. You got a couple of guys left. Fighting over here, there's fighting over there in your churches. What's going on?
You and Peter haven't spoken in years.
well, if you think about that context, you go to Noah. He's a classic. What was it, 100 years to build the ark?
Yeah.
Basically, he says he was building the ark, but then he was out preaching the gospel, more or less, telling everyone, look, it's going to rain, you're all going to die. Obviously that's not the wording, but so don't hold me to that.
25 years.
Get in the ark. That's what he was doing every day. Every day. People are just drinking, being merry, living their life. At the end of those 100 years, the only people he got saved was his family. I think in our economy, you screwed up, Noah. Like our culture today. You messed that up, bro. Your ministry is trash because you only got your family saved.
Great point, because I think a lot of frustration comes from the instant gratification that we get these days with our phones, takeaway food. I want something on Amazon. Better get here in 2 days or I'm going to blow up. And so often the kingdom works much.
I'm laughing because I'm feeling guilty because even today my phone was just lagging. Literally, we're talking seconds. We're talking.
But what's going on with them?
Like, what are you doing, man? And my boy was looking at me and he's like, man, what are you doing, Dad? I'm like, man, the generation we live in, we're screwed up, aren't we?
First world problems. I remember when it was like 2 years ago, the power went out at our house, and my kids are just known streaming pretty much the whole time. No power, no streaming. And I just blew up. Like,
what do we do?
What do we do? So when I grew up, it was like couple of channels, But yeah, I think it's you can't. Yeah, God's timing is God's timing. Doesn't help people are frustrated, and the times that we've all been frustrated at things that aren't going the way we want them to be. But all those people we just spoke about, like those biblical people, like think of Paul's influence now, Moses, or who's to say what you've done now doesn't come out through your kids? Or
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the idea of how much contentment is talked about, I feel like contentment almost paves the way for joy to be.
Yep.
Yeah, with it's sort of like you said, contentment kind of clears away the distractions, the frustrations, and then Jesus talks about us just having joy, which is the consistent, not living in the emotions of up and down, which is frustrations and emotions. So it's funny when you talked about the I guess a question coming back to the frustration to say how we've seen so many leaders maybe go a certain path and maybe some of them have fallen or whatever, they're not where they want to be. Do you think if a small church, because this comes back to the core of why some people start what they start, do you think if a small church generated the same tithing revenue as a big church, the agenda to grow would still be there?
Yeah, possibly. Because I think it's money and it's numbers as well.
But if the money's already there,
I think numbers.
Because then the power comes in with numbers.
100%, yeah, and it's influence. I've got a big church, so potentially I've got more influence. I've got more people that I could reach. I don't think it'd just be that. I'd still think it could be, either or both.
Yeah,
I see Dan thinking.
No, I would lean towards. I think it would. Yeah.
I think it would what?
Oh well, if I've got the money, money's a means to an end.
Because I don't know if you see what I did here, but I'm tying contentness with financial stability.
Yes.
And where some people put those together when it's like it's not right. It's super unhealthy. Might work in a secular, but spiritually it won't work because your contentment then is dependent on your bank account.
Yep.
And I have been through that. I remember waking up based on my mood would be how much money is there. Am I stressed or not? And that was a rude shot coming into business where it's so many ups and downs. Like if you go into business and you deal with the ups and downs like you did when you say work for someone, like you go insane. So I can't imagine how it would be for say pastors coming in and they see tithing up and down, right, with numbers up. It just must be so hard if you're always assessing that and then basing that numbers on whether you are a successful leader. That is a hard road.
It's an ugly road.
That's a hard road. How do we fix it, Scott? How do we change the world?
Change the world.
One soul at a time.
Wow, I don't know. I don't think. Okay, so
I'll ask you a question before we wrap up. It's almost an hour. I'll ask you one question each. If you were to plant a church, how would you do it? What would your model look like?
you know, pastors of the church are probably going to laugh at me and go, oh, he's a little utopian here. But I was just about to say, interesting you say that question. I was just about to say before you asked that question. I used to think it was about getting the right model. It's not. It's about, I think, church is about who you've been called to. So whether that's 2 people, 20, 50, whatever, obviously you're going to get to a certain point where you're not going to have the same sort of influence. The bigger you get, it's harder to do. I think certain models have pros and cons. So what would I do to plant a church? I would follow Jesus, and I'd follow Jesus in terms of where he would lead, and I would always be on the lookout for where the life is. So wherever the life is, I'd put enough structure around that to support it. That would be what I'd do.
Nice.
Well. I was going to ask you, but you're already doing it.
It's a hard one.
Don't ask me. I don't know.
Oh, I think, look.
Well, right now you're pastoring a church,
Yeah.
and I go there, and I love it. I'll say that until I leave it. No,
that's the next
frustrating.
podcast.
So frustrating.
That's the next podcast.
I'm like, yeah. My next one is why I left. But I think you guys are, and I mean, we dialogue this stuff all the time because I'm always fascinated because I look at yourself and Marsh, and I'm like, it's 2 guys that, who I know have been such high achieving leaders and high caliber people. Like you can build, you can make it happen, you can go, but you're fighting very hard to really be pastors. And I would say you have told me time and time again off a podcast and one-on-one how much more joy and how much more content you are now. Why is that?
I think because at a base level, Marshall and myself know who we are, and we're not threatened, intimidated, insecure by the church or ministry down the road that might have bazillions of people or whatever. So we understand, I feel like we have a good hold on our identity. This is who we are. This is the gift and the call and the grace that God's given us. So it is not, for us, not about like, this is what we do because we're raging against the machine or everyone else is wrong. No, we don't have the grace of Hillsong, never will. It's unique. That's the grace that they have to do what they do. So we understand that, and so this is, we know who we are, and that I think that may sound arrogant to some, but I feel like we're in our 40s now, and we're not trying to dominate the world. We know who we are, how God has wired us, and it's a very freeing thing to not have to, I don't have to prove, what I've got to prove. In the end, all that matters is I love my wife, I love my children, and I love the people that God has put in my path, and hopefully we stay true to that. And it's just.
I'll let you know on this show if you don't.
It's Christ. I think it's more Christ-like.
Amazing.
Like Jesus says, "I'm the good shepherd. The shepherd lays his life down for the sheep." That was one of our things we talked about before starting church. We're like, man, actually, it's not the sheep's job to come here and build this thing.
It's true.
To get on this vision or whatever dream or whatever train we're on. It's actually, biblically speaking, it's the shepherd's job to lay his life down for the sheep. So we actually were talking about this before we started, and we're like, man, we're here to serve them and see what's in their life, and hopefully by the grace of God extract that to see them fulfill what God's put on their life. And I think we do our best to stay true to that, and I think that is there's a real contentment with that. There's a real honestly, if I could peel the layers away of my heart, I'm not. Oh man, I'm very chilled now.
Yeah.
Like really chilled. It is a contentment thing. For good, man. It's whatever.
I think it's a good summary for, maybe just to give some kind of practical lesson for maybe anyone watching who's kind of in the middle of frustrations. I would say I'm far less frustrated than I ever have been, by far. And that's not because of go where you go. No. It's purely because my relationship with Jesus has matured. And I'm content.
Yeah.
I'm super content, and I know that God wants to use me in certain ways. I no longer compare. Comparison used to be a big cause of frustration. I used to look outside other lanes, and I just realised that God doesn't do that. It's kind of about your own race. Now we say that, but that finally clicked with me, and that allowed me just to take hold of the joy in knowing that, oh man, no matter what happens, like I've got God. And that was the biggest difference before knowing Jesus to now knowing Jesus. I remember my sister has always asked me, what was the biggest thing? Like my older sister used to say, what's the biggest difference in your life? And I used to just tell her that I don't sweat things now. I just know that, well, ultimately, God's got it. And I say that in a confident way, not an airy-fairy way, like, oh, whatever. No, my heart's good and my motives are good and I'm pure and I'm just trying to walk the narrow path, and hopefully over time as I mature, it gets more narrow. And I trust that God's got it. So I guess maybe for a little, we probably taught ourselves in this podcast, man, being content and understanding how powerful joy is can keep frustrations out. Anything to add before we wrap it up, Scotty?
I'd love what you said there. There is a real difference between following Jesus and following a certain brand or a flavour of church or in a particular church environment. And if you step out of those environments, it's very disorientating because, I think you can test this, where your spirituality is managed to a certain point, and then you step away from that and follow him and let him win you into trust with your finances, trust with your gifts, trust with your friendships, your church, etc. And it's like the first thing you get taught is just relax. Like, we'll walk this out together. There's going to be periods, sometimes, years where things aren't going to come to pass. But if I have trust in Jesus, I know at some point it will. Maybe in the next life, mate. I don't know.
Yeah, which is pretty. It's funny he says that. Which, like, not to wave the flag for where we go, but man, the biggest thing that Marsh and Dan, they kind of live by this. When someone comes in, it's kind of like, just relax, just take it easy, sit down. You know what I mean? It's just like,
it
just take it.
Shocks a lot of people.
It does. Because I was like, what do you mean?
You're not going to plug me in?
Where's the car park then? What do you mean? They're like, just chill, like just relax and spend time, and you come to us in a year, because that's how long it takes to just pump the brakes and sort it out. Great, thank you guys.
Awesome.
Enjoyed that, and until next time.